The city was asleep. At least, it pretended to be. Midnight rain hammered down in relentless sheets, swallowing the sound of tires on slick pavement, washing neon lights into ghostly rivers that streaked across the asphalt. Most windows were dark, blinds drawn. But behind that curtain of silence, the city breathed in whispers, dangerous whispers. Through the storm, a small figure ran. A little black girl, no more than 6 years old, sprinted barefoot across the deserted street. Her tiny feet slapped against the pavement, splashing into puddles that stung like needles in the cold. Her breath came in ragged gasps, every inhale a fight against the night. The oversized t-shirt clinging to her frame was soaked through, plastered to her skin. Her eyes were wide with terror, wide enough that even in the darkness, anyone could see the story in them. She wasn't just running. She was fleeing. 2 men tore after her. Bigger, stronger, relentless. Traffickers. Predators who thrived in the shadows, their boots pounding against the street like war drums. One cursed under his breath, slipping on the rain-slick ground. The other grinned, as though the hunt thrilled him. "Get her," one of them roared, his voice slicing through the storm. The girl's heart screamed louder than her footsteps. Every corner she turned, every shadow she darted into, she expected to be caught. Her tiny body was trembling with exhaustion, but fear kept her legs moving. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, "Run. Don't stop running." And so she ran. A pair of headlights burst through the rain. A black luxury sedan, sleek as a predator itself, screeched as its driver slammed the brakes. Tires skidded against the wet pavement, spraying water into the air. Inside the car sat a man who, to the world, was untouchable. Richard Hale. Billionaire. Tech mogul. Known for skyscrapers, private jets, and deals signed in penthouses above the clouds. But in this moment, he was just a man with his hands gripping the wheel, eyes narrowing at the sight in front of him. A child. Running for her life. 2 men chasing. Richard's chest tightened. He didn't think, he reacted. The girl stumbled in front of his car. He flung the door open and stepped out into the rain, his Italian suit instantly soaked, but he didn't care. "Hey!" Richard's voice thundered against the storm. "What the hell are you doing?" The traffickers slowed, their eyes flicking to him. For a second, they looked amused. "This ain't your business," one spat, his teeth glinting in the streetlight. Richard glanced down at the girl, trembling at his feet. She was clutching her arms tight to her chest, eyes darting everywhere for escape. His gut twisted. He had seen fear before, on Wall Street, in boardrooms, in hostile negotiations, but never like this. Never in a child. He stepped in front of her, raising a hand like a shield. "Stay behind me," he said firmly. The traffickers laughed. "Move, rich boy. You don't want to get hurt." Richard's jaw clenched. He wasn't built for street fights, his strength came from contracts, not fists. But something primal surged inside him, anger, maybe even something older than that. "You'll have to go through me first," he growled. The first trafficker lunged. Richard wasn't quick, but adrenaline sharpened him. He swung, connecting his fist with the man's jaw. Pain shot through his knuckles, but the trafficker stumbled back, surprised. The second man rushed in, ramming into Richard's side. They both crashed into the hood of the car, the billionaire grunting as metal and bone collided. The little girl screamed. Richard shoved the man off, chest heaving, blood mixing with rain on his lip. He staggered but stood his ground. The first trafficker recovered, fury replacing mockery. He reached into his jacket, pulling out something that glinted under the streetlight. A knife. The rain seemed to pause. The night held its breath. Richard's pulse thundered in his ears as he instinctively stepped back, shielding the girl tighter behind him. The trafficker grinned, wicked and certain. He raised the knife, rain dripping from its edge like poison. And then he lunged. Rain still pounded against the city as silence fell after the clash. The trafficker's knife glinted inches from Richard's chest, then a shout from a distant window broke the spell. "What's going on down there?" Lights flicked on across the street. A dog barked. The two men exchanged a look. Sirens weren't coming, not yet, but too many eyes were. One of them snarled, grabbing his partner's arm. "Forget it. We'll find her again." With a final glare, they vanished into the storm, swallowed by the night. Richard stood motionless, chest heaving, until their shadows disappeared. His hand shook as adrenaline drained from his veins. He tasted blood on his lip. His shirt clung to his body, heavy with rain and sweat. And then, he remembered. He turned. The little girl was still there, pressed against the side of his car. She was trembling so hard it looked as if her bones might shatter from the inside out. Her big eyes, terrified, searching, met his, and for a heartbeat he felt something he hadn't in years. Responsibility. Kneeling down, ignoring the sting in his ribs, he softened his voice. "It's okay. They're gone." She didn't move. Didn't speak. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. Like a wild animal cornered, unsure whether to trust. Richard carefully reached into his jacket, pulling out a handkerchief. He held it out, palm open, not moving closer. Rain drummed around them. "Here," he murmured, "you're safe." After a long hesitation, she took it with trembling fingers, clutching it more like a lifeline than cloth. He glanced at her bare feet, scraped raw from running. His chest tightened. "We need to get you out of this rain." She hesitated, eyes darting in the direction the traffickers had run, as if expecting them to leap back out of the shadows. Then, finally, she gave the tiniest nod. Richard exhaled slowly and opened the passenger door. "Come on. Just sit inside. You don't have to say anything." The girl climbed into the car, tiny and drenched, curling into the leather seat like she wanted to disappear. Richard slid into the driver's seat, but for a moment he didn't start the engine. He just sat there, staring at the wheel, rain pounding on the windshield, the silence thick with questions. Who was she? Why were they after her? And why did he feel like he couldn't just drive away? He glanced at her again. Her fingers still clutched his handkerchief, white-knuckled. Her eyes flicked to the window, watching every shadow with primal fear. She looked far too young to carry this kind of terror. Richard cleared his throat. "You don't have to talk right now." But, his voice softened, surprising even him. "You're safe with me. I promise." For the first time, her eyes left the window and looked at him. Really looked. She didn't say a word, but something shifted, an almost imperceptible flicker of trust. Richard finally turned the key. The car purred to life, headlights slicing through the rain. He drove. The city blurred past them, neon signs, shuttered shops, alleys that seemed to hold more shadows than walls. He didn't know where he was going until the familiar skyline of his own high-rise loomed ahead. By the time they pulled into the underground garage, the girl had curled against the seat, exhaustion claiming her. She wasn't asleep, not fully, her shoulders still twitched with tension, but her eyelids drooped with the weight of survival. Richard parked, hesitated, then gently lifted her from the seat. She stiffened but didn't resist. She was light, too light, as though she hadn't eaten properly in days. In the mirrored elevator, their reflection startled him. He looked disheveled, blood on his lip, rainwater dripping from his hair onto his $1,000 suit. And in his arms, a fragile child who didn't belong in this world of marble and glass. When the doors opened to his penthouse, the contrast hit like thunder. The vast space was sterile, polished, lifeless. White marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the storm. Designer furniture that no one sat on. For years, it had been enough. It was the home of a man who had everything, except anyone to share it with. Now, in his arms, was the one thing he hadn't expected, a reason to feel again. He set her down gently on the couch, pulling a blanket from the side. She pulled it around her like armor, small hands gripping the edges. Richard crouched in front of her, lowering himself to her eye level. "Listen," he said quietly. "I don't know what's happening. I don't know who those men were. But you're safe here tonight. No one's going to hurt you." For a long moment, she said nothing. Her lips trembled as if words wanted to come but couldn't escape. Then, barely above a whisper, she breathed out 5 haunting words. "They already took my mommy." The air in the room shifted. Richard froze, her voice echoing in his head. Not just a lost child. Not just a chase in the rain. This was bigger. And for the first time in years, Richard Hale, man of power, man of wealth, man who thought he'd seen everything, felt the sting of helplessness. But looking at her trembling frame, at the tears finally spilling over onto her cheeks, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He couldn't walk away. The storm had not eased. Rain still battered the tall windows of Richard's penthouse, each drop like a drumbeat counting down to something inevitable. The city below looked smaller from here, insignificant, but the weight in the room was crushing. Richard sat on the edge of a chair across from the girl. She was wrapped in his blanket, dwarfed by it, her tiny fingers gripping the edges like it might keep the world away. The fire crackled low in the hearth, the only warmth in a space too cold, too empty. She hadn't moved much since she whispered about her mother. Just sat there, silent, eyes darting as though the walls themselves might shatter and let those men back in. Richard leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice softer than he thought himself capable of. "Hey. I know you're scared. You don't have to say much. But if I'm going to help you," he paused, searching her face. "I need to know your name." The girl blinked, lips pressed together. For a long moment, Richard thought she might not answer. Then, barely audible, came a whisper. "Maya." The name hung in the air, fragile yet strong, like a candle flame fighting the storm outside. Richard repeated it gently, grounding it. "Maya." For the first time, her eyes lifted and met his. There was pain there, but also something else, a flicker of hope. Richard nodded once. "All right, Maya. I'm Richard. And I promise you, no matter what, I'll keep you safe." Her lip quivered, and she looked down, fumbling with something under the blanket. After a moment, she pulled it out, a small, weathered wooden box. Its edges were chipped, the grain faded, but her tiny hands clutched it like treasure. She held it out, hesitating. Then she whispered, "It's my mommy's." Richard's chest tightened. He accepted the box carefully, as though it were more fragile than glass. He turned it in his hands. It wasn't expensive or elaborate, just a simple keepsake. But when he opened it, the weight of its contents hit harder than gold. Inside was a single photograph, creased and water-stained, but clear enough. A woman in her 30s smiled warmly at the camera, arms wrapped around a much younger Maya. The resemblance was undeniable, same wide eyes, same dimple on the left cheek. Beneath the photo, a thin silver bracelet glinted, engraved with a single word, Trina. Richard's eyes flicked back to Maya. "This is your mom." Maya nodded quickly, clutching the edge of the blanket tighter. They took her. They came to our house. She told me to run. I hid. But, her voice cracked. She screamed, and then, she didn't anymore. Richard's grip on the box tightened. He swallowed hard, anger rising beneath his calm exterior. He had built empires, toppled rivals, controlled entire markets, but none of that power meant a damn thing here. Not against men who preyed on children. Maya continued, voice shaking. They had tattoos. Big black wolf, here, she tapped her wrist. And one of them said they were taking her to the warehouse. That's all I know. I swear. Her small body trembled with the effort of remembering, of forcing the words out. Tears slipped down her cheeks, hot against skin gone cold from the rain. Richard set the box on the table, leaned forward, and steadied his voice. You did good, Maya. More than anyone should ever have to do. And you're not alone now. She sniffled, hugging the blanket tighter. But, what if they come for me? Richard met her eyes, his own voice steady, iron beneath velvet. Then they'll have to go through me first. Maya studied him for a long moment, her small chest rising and falling. And then, like a tiny crack in armor, her shoulders eased, just slightly. Richard sat back, mind already racing. Warehouse. Tattoo. A trafficking network bold enough to snatch women in his city. He knew people, police chiefs, private investigators, men who owed him favors. This was no longer about coincidence. This was a mission. He looked back at the girl, Maya, who was watching him like he was the last thread holding her world together. And in that instant, Richard Hale made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. I'm going to find your mother, he said quietly but firmly. I won't stop until I do. The fire crackled. The rain beat against the glass. And for the first time that night, hope flickered in Maya's eyes. The city slept restlessly beneath the storm, but Richard Hale was wide awake. His penthouse, usually his fortress of solitude, had transformed into a war room. The coffee table was scattered with the wooden box, the photo of Maya's mother, and Richard's phone, its screen glowing as he scrolled through contacts he hadn't touched in years. Maya sat curled on the couch, the blanket still wrapped around her like armor. Her wide eyes tracked every movement he made, like a child clinging to the only thing keeping her tethered to safety. She hadn't let the wooden box out of her sight. Richard exhaled slowly and tapped a name. The phone rang twice before a rough, groggy voice answered. Hale. You know what time it is. Richard didn't waste words. It's about a child. And a woman who's been taken. I need you. A pause, then the voice sharpened. Where are you? My place. Bring what you need. On my way. Richard hung up. He glanced back at Maya. A friend is coming. Someone I trust. Her lips pressed together, but she nodded slightly. Minutes later, a buzzer rang downstairs. Richard answered without hesitation. Soon, the elevator chimed and the doors slid open to reveal a man in his late 40s, broad shoulders, a rugged face carved from too many battles, wearing a jacket heavy with rain. Derek Cole, Richard introduced to Maya. Old friend. Ex-cop. Derek's sharp gaze flicked from Richard's bruised lip to Maya's fragile frame. Guessing this isn't a business deal. No, Richard replied grimly. It's worse. They sat at the table. Richard explained quickly, placing the wooden box and photo between them. Derek listened, jaw tightening. When Maya hesitantly described the tattoo, Derek leaned forward. Wolf on the wrist, he muttered. That's the mark of a crew I've tracked before. Human trafficking, drugs, the works. Nasty men. And bold, snatching a woman from her home. They're either desperate or expanding. Maya flinched at the word snatching. Richard noticed and lowered his voice. She heard them say something about a warehouse. Derek rubbed his jaw. Plenty of warehouses in this city. But if she's right, he pulled out a notepad, sketching. They run operations in the docks, outskirts, and abandoned districts. I can cross-check. Maya shifted uncomfortably, eyes down. Then, in a whisper, she added, one of them, he smelled like oil. Like the gas station near our street. Derek's pen froze mid-stroke. That's something. Richard's chest tightened with cautious hope. We follow that trail. But Derek's eyes were grim. Hale, listen to me. You don't want to dive into this. These people, he cut a glance at Maya, lowered his tone. They don't just scare kids. They kill people who stand in their way. Even you. Richard leaned forward, his voice like steel. They already threatened a 6-year-old girl. They took her mother. You think I'm going to sit here and do nothing? Derek studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. All right. But you're in deep. Once you start, you can't pull out. Maya finally looked up, her small voice cutting the tension. Please don't stop. Please, find her. Richard reached across the table, steadying her trembling hands. We will. The next morning, Derek returned with files. Checked the area around Maya's old neighborhood. Security cams caught a van speeding through around the time her mom disappeared. No plates, but, he slid a blurry still photo across the table. See the driver's arm? Wolf tattoo. Maya gasped softly, clutching the wooden box. That's him. Richard felt the fire rise in his chest. Proof. Not much, but enough to push forward. But Derek wasn't finished. He dropped another file. There's more. That van. It was spotted later near Dock 17, abandoned warehouses. Matches what Maya overheard. Richard straightened. Then that's where we start. Derek raised an eyebrow. Not so fast. I know you, Hale. You're used to buying solutions. These men aren't for sale. They'll bleed you dry and laugh doing it. Richard's voice was sharp. Then we don't buy. We fight. Maya shrank at the word fight, hugging the box tighter. Richard softened his tone, glancing at her. But carefully. We'll find your mother without letting them touch you again. That night, Richard stepped out to his balcony, rain finally easing into drizzle. Derek joined him, lighting a cigarette. You really want to do this? Derek asked. These people aren't just thugs. They're connected, corrupt cops, paid judges, international ties. They'll crush you if you're not careful. Richard's gaze stayed on the skyline. They tried to crush her. Derek blew smoke into the night. Then you're in for a war. Behind them, Maya's soft voice drifted from the couch. I'm not afraid if you're with me. Richard turned. She had drawn something on a scrap of paper, a crude sketch of a building, tall and blocky, with a van out front. Her small hands trembled as she handed it to him. That's where they took her, she whispered. Richard's jaw tightened. He didn't know how much was memory and how much was a child's imagination, but it didn't matter. It was enough to move forward. And deep down, he knew there was no turning back now. The following evening, Richard's penthouse no longer looked like a monument to wealth, it had become a command center. Laptops hummed on the dining table, maps of the city sprawled across the polished wood. Red circles marked warehouses, blue pins dotted gas stations and side streets. Derek's notepad was already filled with scrawls of names, times, and half-legible codes. But Derek wasn't enough. Richard knew it. If he was going to tear into a trafficking network, he needed someone who could reach deeper than fists and instincts. He needed someone with eyes everywhere. So he made another call. The elevator chimed. Out stepped a woman in her late 30s. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, laptop bag slung over one shoulder. Isabella Chen, Richard said as he rose to greet her. Cyber intelligence. Ex-FBI. She shook his hand briskly, then set the laptop down without another word. Within seconds, screens lit up with streams of data, warehouse registries, vehicle records, police chatter. Derek said you've stirred a hornet's nest, Isabella said, fingers flying across the keys. You weren't exaggerating. The tattoo matches a syndicate I've been tracking for years. Eastern European roots, expanding here. And they're sloppy enough to leave digital breadcrumbs. Maya, curled up at the far end of the couch, peered at her curiously. Isabella softened her voice for a moment. Hi there. I'm going to help find your mom. Maya nodded, clutching her wooden box tighter. Then Isabella turned back to the screen, tone hard again. But I'll be honest, once we start, they'll know we're looking. They'll push back. And it won't be pretty. Richard's jaw tightened. We start anyway. 4 hours, they worked. Maps pinned to the wall. Photos zoomed and enhanced. Isabella tracked the van through traffic cameras until one blurry still revealed it pulling into Dock 17, exactly where Maya had remembered. Warehouse cluster on the South Pier, Isabella explained, highlighting buildings. Half abandoned, but one still shows electricity usage at odd hours. That's our most likely site. Derek leaned back, crossing his arms. Security. High. Guards rotate, armed. Cameras, floodlights. They're not just storing crates there, they're keeping people. Richard studied the screen. His reflection stared back at him, hard and unfamiliar. Then that's where she is. While the adults dissected maps and strategies, Maya quietly slid off the couch. She padded to the coffee table, found a scrap of paper and crayons left from one of Richard's assistants, and began to draw. Her picture was simple, a smiling woman with curly hair holding her hand. Above them, a sun. Around them, flowers. Richard noticed when she shyly pushed the paper toward him. It's Mommy and me, she said softly. His throat tightened. He knelt beside her, one hand resting gently on the table. That's beautiful, Maya. She looked up, her wide eyes glimmering with something fragile but unbroken. You're going to bring her back, right? Richard swallowed hard, then nodded. Yes. I promise. She smiled faintly, then returned to coloring. Around them, Derek loaded weapons onto the table and Isabella laid out surveillance feeds. The contrast was sharp, innocents drawing flowers while adults prepared for war. Later that night, the team huddled over the map. We go in quietly, Derek said, tapping Dock 17. We don't engage unless we have to. Get proof, get her mom, get out. Proof is key, Isabella added. If we only get the girl's mother, they'll scatter and rebuild elsewhere. We need evidence strong enough to dismantle the network. Richard's voice cut through, steady and cold. Then we do both. We save Trina and we burn them down. Derek raised an eyebrow. You're talking like a soldier, Hale. Richard's gaze flicked to Maya, asleep now on the couch with her drawing clutched to her chest. I'm talking like a man with something worth fighting for. Night swallowed Dock 17 whole. Rusted cranes leaned like sleeping giants, and the warehouses hunched close together, their windows dark or boarded, as if the city itself was trying to hide what was going on inside. A mist rose off the water, carrying the sour tang of diesel and old rope. It smelled like places people went when they wanted to disappear. Inside Richard's penthouse, the room had gone quiet. Maya slept on the couch with her drawing folded against her chest. The team moved with the careful choreography of people about to break bad things into pieces. Derek checked the weapons again. Isabella fed the last coordinates into the drone's nav. Richard slid on a plain black jacket over his clothes and felt, for the first time since he'd been a child, the strange rightness of being terribly out of his element. Remember, Derek said, voice low, this is recon first. We get video, we get names, we get Trina. We don't try to be heroes unless we have to. You ready, Hale? Richard met his friend's eyes. I'm ready. They parked 2 blocks away in the shadows. The plan was surgical. Isabella's drone would slip a camera through a broken window, sweep the lower floors, find signs of captives. Derek and a 2-man entry team would fan out to the loading bay. Richard was to stay back and provide overwatch, an extra pair of hands if things went sideways. They moved like ghosts. The damp air clung to them. Isabella's tablet fed a live black and white whisper of the warehouse interior into their earpieces. Rows of stacked crates. A faint shuffle. A narrow corridor that led deeper where the camera cut to static and then, sudden clarity, women's faces, shadows of people curled on pallets, eyes hollow and wet. Got a room, Isabella murmured. Lower level, 6th bay. At least 3 women, looks like more beyond the curtain. Derek clicked his tongue. Alpha moves. 2 men with me. Hale, you hold here and keep comms tight. Isabella, we need everything. They slipped inside through a service gate left just cracked, an advantage Isabella had spotted and exploited. The stale air hit their faces, old plastic, sweat, the metallic tang of fear. Derek's flashlight cut through dark where Isabella's drone could not reach. They found a lock of hair, a discarded shoe, small signs of life strewn like clues left by wolves. Derek signaled and they moved faster, pushing through a narrow passage until they came to a curtain partition. Voices, not loud, but unmistakable, leaked through, a man's cursing, a woman sobbing. Derek put his hand up. 2 muffled knocks. No answer. The curtain pulled back and the world they had only suspected folded open, pale faces, hollow eyes, a row of makeshift beds. One woman sat with her knees pulled up. Another pressed fingers to her lips, terrified. In the far corner, curled under a threadbare blanket, a woman with tired eyes lay still. Derek whispered, Trina. At his voice, the woman's head tilted. Eyes like Maya's blinked up at him. Help, she breathed, a single word that carried the gravity of everything. They moved in. Derek snapped cuffs on a surprised guard, the room exploding into sudden motion as other men bolted down hallways. A shout rose, metal banging as someone slammed a gate. Isabella's drone, hovering cleanly through a broken vent, got what they needed, faces, layouts, timestamps. Proof. Then everything changed. A headlamp flared in a window above. A shout, sharp, panicked, broke the low hum of their raid. Footsteps pounded down corridors, heavier than before. They're on to us, one voice barked. Someone had tripped a sensor, an outside spotlight swept the warehouse's flank like a searching lighthouse. Move! Derek hissed. Evacuate the victims, now. They scooped women into arms, rushed toward the exit. Richard, who had been watching the perimeter, heard the alarm and moved to intercept a rear guard. In the chaos a man slammed into him. A scuffle spilled onto gravel outside. The rain had picked up again, slicking the ground and making every step treacherous. From an upper walkway a silhouette fell into a crouch, hands flying for a phone. A guard snatched a shotgun. Someone's voice screamed a name that would make any heart drop, Rich, Miles, he's the rich bastard from the tower. The name landed like a punch. The man outside who had been at the original chase, one of the traffickers, recognized the billionaire's face. Richard's actions in the rain had been public enough, or close enough, that a face stuck in a predator's memory. In the second that recognition spread like ink through the night, the nature of the operation shifted. This was no longer a faceless rescue. It was a personal fight. Gunfire cracked. A figure ducked behind crates. Isabella's drone feed stuttered as someone struck it with a pole. Inches of metal clanged, and the camera went dark. Derek shouted, dragging Trina toward an exit while second men fought to cover them. Then someone shouted, Van. Van on the south lot, load them. The traffickers were moving people like cargo, pushing them toward waiting vehicles. Derek's plan unraveled into motion. They had the victims, but not the rate of escape they needed. They needed route clearance, support, things they didn't have. They bolted through a side door into the night, rain slashing their faces. Sirens wailed in the distance now, not because anyone had called yet, but because somewhere a street-level camera had pinged, someone had triggered an alert. The team sprinted to the rendezvous point with the women bundled tight. But the cost was immediate. Isabella's drone was lost, somewhere inside the warehouse, smashed. The footage, what remained, was corrupted, only snippets survived, a face in the gloom, a crude timestamp, the unmistakable layout of the warehouse. Enough to prove there had been captives, but not enough to hold the entire network. Back in the car, breathless and dripping, Richard clutched the wooden box that had sat on the passenger seat. Trina sobbed into Maya's drawing. Maya, pressed between blankets and strangers, had curled so small it hurt to watch. The adrenaline coursed through them like a fever. They had accomplished something, a rescue at all costs, but they'd lost the one thing Isabella had warned them they needed, clean, uninterrupted proof to pin on the syndicate. Derek swore under his breath, furious and raw. They were expecting us. How did they? Isabella's voice was low and brutal. Because someone recognized Hale. There's chatter on the underground channels, someone posted a clip about a rich man in a suit. It's spreading. They now know a high-profile figure is involved. They'll react. Richard's stomach dropped at the implication. Fighters don't forgive notoriety. Predators escalate. Knowing who had touched their operation would make them act faster and darker. He had pulled a child from the street and, in doing so, had painted a target across all of them. The team drove away with Trina slumped in the back, the scavenged video files reverberating on Isabella's broken feed, the rain turning to a cold, relentless sheet. Sirens grew louder behind them, officials finally answering someone's distress call, but the victory tasted thin. On the passenger seat, Maya's drawing lay open, the sun she'd drawn still smiled. Richard looked at it, then at the faces of the rescued women, and realized the night had turned for worse and might get much worse before any of them found safety. He sat very still, feeling the weight of what he had started. Outside, the city kept its indifferent rhythm. Inside, a dangerous storm had just been kicked loose, and it had his name on it. By dawn, the city had calmed, but Richard's penthouse was a storm of its own. Trina sat wrapped in a blanket on the sofa, her arms tight around Maya as if she feared the girl might vanish if she let go. Maya clutched her wooden box, face buried in her mother's chest, unwilling to look up. The reunion had been raw, tears, sobs, clinging, but it was fragile, overshadowed by the reality that the network was still out there. Across the room, Derek paced like a caged animal. Isabella was on the phone, arguing with clipped words. Richard stood at the window, looking down on the streets he owned, his reflection fractured in the glass. Finally, Isabella snapped her phone shut. It's done. I sent everything we managed to pull to my bureau contacts. They'll send a team. Richard turned. Good. Then we finish this. But Isabella's expression darkened. No, Richard. Not like that. The Bureau needs time. They'll review the evidence, confirm it's legitimate, build a case. They're talking days, maybe weeks. Richard's voice cut sharp. We don't have weeks. Those men know I'm involved. They'll scatter, vanish, move their captives before the sun sets again. Derek slammed his fist into the table. She's right, Hale. These guys don't wait around. Every hour we don't hit them, they're moving product, people, whatever they can. By the time a judge signs papers, the trail's cold. Isabella rounded on him. And if we act without jurisdiction, we blow the case. We lose the network for good. Do you think arresting a couple low-level thugs is enough? They'll rebuild overnight. We need to take the whole thing down. The air was thick, tension slicing between them. Richard finally stepped forward, voice low but steady. Listen to me. You talk about cases and protocols. But I saw that child running barefoot in the rain, hunted like prey. I saw her mother dragged away. And I will not, his voice cracked, fury surging, I will not wait behind red tape while they hurt another family. Maya's small voice broke the silence. They'll take more kids. Her question hit harder than any argument. Everyone turned. She looked up, wide-eyed, her tiny hands clutching her mother's sleeve. Isabella's face softened. Yes. If we don't stop them properly, they will. Richard knelt in front of Maya, his anger tempered by her fear. And that's why we can't let them keep going. Do you understand? Maya nodded, tears brimming but unfallen. Richard rose, fire rekindled. We go in again. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Isabella shook her head. You'll be on your own. The Bureau won't back you without more evidence. And if you cross their jurisdiction, they'll come after you too. Richard's reply was ice. Then let them. I'll take the risk. Derek exhaled, running a hand over his face. You're insane. But you're right. They won't stop. If we wait, we lose everything. For a moment, silence. Then Isabella snapped her laptop shut, hard enough to echo. Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you. We'll do this your way, off the books. Just know if it all burns down, the Bureau will bury your name with it. Richard's jaw clenched. Then I'll burn with it. Later that afternoon, as the team regrouped, Derek brought news that chilled the room. Word spreading on the street, he said, dropping into a chair. The traffickers know exactly who you are, Richard. They've been bragging, the billionaire stuck his nose in our business. That kind of talk spreads fast. You're a target now. Your company, your staff, your assets, they're all exposed. Richard's stomach tightened. He thought of board meetings, contracts, headlines. All of it meaningless now. What was the point of money and power if it couldn't shield a single child from predators? He met Derek's gaze. Then let them come. They'll find I'm not as soft as they think. That evening, as the sun sank into a smear of crimson on the horizon, Richard stood in his penthouse study, staring at Maya's drawing pinned to the wall. The smiling sun. The flowers. The woman and child holding hands. A dream too pure for this broken world. Trina stepped in quietly, her voice still hoarse. Why are you doing this? You don't even know us. Richard turned slowly. His voice was softer now, stripped of the steel he'd shown to Derek and Isabella. Because once. I lost someone. And I couldn't stop it. Not with all the money in the world. Not with all the power. And I swore I'd never feel that helpless again. Trina's eyes filled, but she nodded. Behind her, Maya peeked around the doorway. She held her wooden box, her voice tiny but certain, then don't stop. Richard gave a faint, tired smile. I won't. And with that, the path was set. The docks were alive with shadows. At night, Dock 17 was different, no longer quiet, no longer abandoned. Trucks idled in the dark, their engines humming low. Men with flashlights patrolled the grounds, their beams slicing through the fog like blades. The smell of oil, seaweed, and rust thickened the air. From the vantage point of a rooftop across the street, Richard peered through binoculars. His jaw was set like stone. Derek crouched beside him, scanning with military focus, while Isabella fed live camera feeds to her laptop. 6 guards outside, Derek whispered. At least 10 more inside. And look, he pointed to a van parked near the loading bay, its back doors half open. Inside, Richard could just make out movement. Shadows shifting. People, Richard muttered. His fists clenched. They're moving them tonight. Isabella's voice was steady, though her hands flew across the keyboard. I've got partial control of their cameras. If I loop feeds now, we've got 15 minutes before they notice. Derek glanced at Richard. This is it. You ready? Richard's eyes burned with a fierce clarity. We're bringing them out. And we're not leaving anyone behind. The team split, Derek and 2 trusted allies sliding toward the loading bay, Isabella directing from her van parked nearby, Richard slipping into the shadows of the dockyard. The storm had finally cleared, but the night was heavy with mist, swallowing sound and distorting sight. They moved like phantoms. A guard passed, flashlight beam sweeping inches from Richard's face, but he held still, breath frozen. When the light turned, he advanced, silent and certain. Inside the warehouse, the air was suffocating. Crates stacked high created narrow corridors, a maze designed to hide sins. From deeper within came the muffled sounds, women crying, chains clinking, boots stomping. Derek raised a fist, signaling halt. He pointed to a side door. That's it. Richard's pulse pounded. They pushed through, and the nightmare unfolded. Rows of women huddled in cages crudely welded from chain link and steel bars. Some stared blankly, broken by time. Others clutched each other, eyes wide with terror at the sudden intrusion. The stink of sweat, fear, and despair filled the room. And then Richard saw her. Trina. She sat against the wall of one cage, face pale, body weak, but her eyes, those same eyes as Maya's, snapped open when she saw him. For a heartbeat, disbelief froze her expression. Then recognition broke it wide open. Maya, she croaked. Her voice cracked, raw. Richard's throat closed, but he forced the words. She's safe. She's waiting for you. Tears streamed down Trina's face. She reached through the bars, trembling fingers grasping at air. Please, help us. Derek smashed the lock with a crowbar. The cage door creaked open, and Trina collapsed forward into Richard's arms. Her frailty shocked him, skin and bone, strength gone, but her will still burning. He held her steady. I promised Maya I'd bring you back. And I keep my promises. The women around them began to sob, some in relief, some in disbelief. But the moment shattered. A shout echoed across the warehouse. Guards burst in, weapons raised, rage in their eyes. Intruders. Gunfire ripped through the silence. Sparks exploded as bullets ricocheted off metal. Derek shoved Richard and Trina behind cover. Isabella's voice screamed through the comms, they know you're there. Extraction now. Richard's blood roared. He pulled Trina close, shielding her as Derek and his men exchanged fire. The women screamed, ducking low, clutching one another. Derek barked orders. Get them out. Move. Richard half-carried, half-dragged Trina toward the exit. She stumbled, but her eyes never left him, clutching his sleeve with desperate strength. Don't leave them, she whispered, motioning to the others. We won't, he promised. It was chaos, shouting, gunfire, footsteps pounding. But somehow, they carved a path out. Derek's team hustled the women into the waiting van. Richard lifted Trina in, her arms still clutching him like a lifeline. As the last of them piled inside, headlights flared at the far end of the dock. A black SUV roared toward them, tires screaming, engine snarling like a beast. The driver's door flew open. And Richard saw him. Rago. The wolf tattoo coiled on his wrist, his scarred face twisted in fury. The trafficker boss, alive, burning with rage. His eyes locked on Richard with a predator's recognition. You. Rago's voice thundered across the docks. You think you can take what's mine? He raised a pistol, firing wildly. Bullets pinged off the van. Derek shoved Richard inside, slamming the door. Drive. The engine roared. Tires screeched. The van bolted forward, leaving Rago howling in the fog, gun raised, eyes blazing with vengeance. Inside the van, the women sobbed in relief. Trina clung to Richard, whispering over and over, Maya. Maya. He gripped her hands tight. She's waiting for you. Hold on. Derek drove like a madman, weaving through empty streets, headlights carving their path back toward safety. Behind them, Dock 17 shrank into the night, but Richard knew this wasn't over. Not with Rago still out there. But for now, the impossible had happened. A mother had been pulled back from the abyss. A promise had been kept. For a moment, it felt like peace. Richard's penthouse was lit with the soft glow of morning. Trina, fragile but alive, sat on the couch with Maya curled against her side, the wooden box nestled safely between them. Derek leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, exhaustion etched into his face. Isabella typed furiously on her laptop, compiling evidence from the raid. For the first time in days, Richard allowed himself a breath. He poured a glass of water, hands still shaking from the adrenaline of the rescue. They had done it. Against all odds, they had pulled Maya's mother out alive. But beneath the calm, unease coiled in his gut. Rago's face lingered in his mind, the fury, the promise of vengeance. Men like him didn't simply fade. They returned. And he was right. It started with a sound. A faint click from the elevator shaft. A noise so small, Richard almost dismissed it. But Derek's head snapped up instantly, instincts razor-sharp. His hand went to his gun. "Someone's here," he whispered. The lights flickered. Power surged, then dimmed. Isabella cursed under her breath. "They've cut the feed. We're blind." Richard's pulse thundered. He turned to Trina and Maya. "Get to the study. Lock the door." Trina clutched Maya's hand, eyes wide, but Richard's tone left no room for hesitation. They hurried down the hallway, disappearing behind the heavy oak door. Then the elevator chimed. The doors slid open with an eerie calm. Rago stepped out. Dressed in black, pistol in one hand, knife at his belt, his wolf tattoo glistening with sweat. His scarred face twisted into a smile that chilled the room. Behind him, two armed men fanned out like shadows. Well, Rago drawled, his voice dripping venom. "The billionaire thinks he's a hero. Thought you could steal from me?" His eyes glittered with madness. "Now I take everything from you." Derek fired first. A crack split the air. One of Rago's men fell, clutching his chest. The other fired back, bullets splintering the marble countertop. Chaos exploded. Richard dove for cover, grabbing a heavy vase and hurling it at the gunman. The man staggered, just long enough for Derek to finish him. Smoke and dust filled the air, alarms shrieking. And then it was just Rago. He moved forward slowly, pistol aimed at Richard. His grin widened. "You made me bleed. You humiliated me. Tonight, I make you watch as I carve the heart out of what you love." Richard's blood ran cold. He knew exactly who Rago meant. Richard stepped out from behind the counter, unarmed. His voice was steady. "It's me you want. Leave them out of this." Rago tilted his head, mock sympathy on his face. "Oh, noble billionaire. But I don't deal in bargains. I deal in pain." He lunged. The pistol fired, missing by inches as Richard knocked his arm aside. They crashed into the glass coffee table, shards exploding around them. The gun skittered across the floor. Now it was knife against bare hands. Rago slashed wildly, the blade whistling past Richard's ribs. Richard grabbed his wrist, straining, every muscle burning as he forced the knife down, away from his throat. They grappled, grunting, sweat mixing with blood. Derek staggered up, gun raised, but Rago twisted, dragging Richard into his line of fire. "Shoot, and your friend dies." Rago snarled. For a heartbeat, time froze. And then, a sound. From the hallway, the oak door creaked open. Maya stood there, trembling but fierce, clutching the wooden box to her chest. "Leave him alone," she cried, her voice breaking but powerful. Rago's eyes flicked toward her. That single distraction was all Richard needed. He drove his fist into Rago's jaw, sending the knife clattering across the floor. Derek fired. The bullet struck true. Rago staggered back, blood blooming on his chest. He collapsed against the shattered glass, eyes wide with disbelief. His gaze flicked from Richard to Maya, fury twisting into something darker, then the light left his eyes. The wolf was dead. Silence. Only the sound of Maya's sobbing breath broke the stillness. Richard rushed to her, kneeling, pulling her into his arms. She buried her face against him, shaking. "It's over," he whispered, voice raw. "He can't hurt you anymore." Trina emerged from the study, tears streaming as she gathered her daughter close. Derek leaned heavily against the wall, bleeding but alive. Isabella typed furiously, her voice shaking. "We've got it all, footage, audio, everything. This ends their entire operation." Richard looked around at the wreckage, shattered glass, blood, smoke rising from bullet holes. His perfect penthouse, once a monument to solitude, was now a battlefield. And somehow, that felt right. Because from this night forward, his life would never be the same. The city looked different in daylight. For the first time in days, the storm had passed. The sky stretched wide and clear, as if the night had finally surrendered its grip. Inside Richard's penthouse, silence reigned, but not the old, hollow kind. This silence was soft, alive, broken only by the quiet breaths of people who had survived something unspeakable. Maya sat curled in her mother's lap, the wooden box between them. Trina smoothed her daughter's hair, whispering words only Maya could hear. Across the room, Derek's arm was bandaged, and Isabella, exhausted but focused, clicked through files on her laptop. Evidence of the Traffickers' empire was streaming to authorities, ensuring the network would crumble. And Richard Hale, the man who once lived above the city with nothing but glass and steel for company, stood at the window, watching the sun rise. Later that afternoon, Maya padded across the room, her tiny feet soft against the marble. She carried a small pot with soil in it, something she had found in the corner of Richard's unused balcony garden. Clutched in her other hand was a single flower, delicate and bright, bought by Trina from a street vendor on the way back. She looked up at Richard. "Can we plant it here?" Her voice was small, but it carried the weight of something bigger. Renewal. Hope. Richard knelt beside her. Of course. Together, they pressed the flower into the soil, Maya's little hands patting it down while Richard steadied the pot. When it was done, she smiled faintly. "Now it has a home." Richard's chest tightened. He glanced at Trina, who watched from the doorway, tears shining in her eyes. "Just like you," he said softly. Maya beamed, and for the first time, her smile was free of fear. That evening, Trina approached Richard while Maya slept soundly in the guest room. Her voice was low, roughened by days of fear and exhaustion. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You risked everything for us." "Why?" Richard leaned against the counter, searching for the right words. Finally, he answered, voice raw. "Because I couldn't let her story end like that. I couldn't let your story end like that. And maybe," his voice faltered. "Maybe I needed saving just as much as she did." Trina studied him for a long moment, then gave a small, understanding nod. "You saved more than just us, Richard. You saved yourself." Weeks passed. The authorities dismantled Rago's network piece by piece. Arrests made headlines. Survivors were placed in care. But in Richard's world, the real change was smaller, quieter. One morning, he sat at the long dining table with Maya across from him. She was coloring again, this time with new crayons and paper he had bought her. She drew a picture of 3 people, herself, her mother, and Richard. All holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. When she slid it across to him, he stared at it for a long time. His throat tightened. Maya tilted her head. "Are you gonna stay with us?" The question cut straight through him. He looked at her, then at Trina, who stood in the doorway, watching quietly. Richard reached across the table, resting his hand gently over Maya's. "If you'll let me. I'd like to be part of your family." Maya's eyes lit up. She looked at her mother, who smiled softly, nodding. Then Maya whispered, almost as if testing the words on her tongue, "Daddy." Richard's heart broke and healed in the same instant. Months later, the rooftop garden was no longer barren. Flowers grew in neat rows, tended by Maya's small hands and Richard's clumsy but devoted attempts at gardening. The little pot they had planted together still sat at the center, the flower now blooming strong and tall. One evening, Richard stood there with Maya at his side, both of them looking out over the city. She leaned against him, the wind tugging at her curls. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked quietly. Richard shook his head. "No. The bad men are gone. And even if others try, they'll never take you away from me. From us." Maya nodded, satisfied. Then she slipped her small hand into his. "I'm glad you found me." Richard looked down at her, then out at the skyline that had once meant nothing but profit and power. Now it meant something else. Responsibility. Family. Redemption. He squeezed her hand gently. "No, Maya. You found me." The camera of the story would pull back here, leaving them standing together against the vast expanse of the city, the rooftop garden blooming around them, the flower they planted swaying gently in the breeze. A billionaire who had once lived in emptiness. A little girl who had once run barefoot in the rain. Now a family, forged not by blood, but by choice, and stronger than any darkness. Fade to black.